Hi there, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today on this Procurement IQ and Art of Procurement webinar. My name is Philip Ideson. I'm the founder of Art of Procurement, and I'll be facilitating the conversation today. And the topic that we're going to be discussing is From Data to Decisions, Strategic Planning Essentials. As we go through the conversation, I would really encourage you to ask any questions that you may have or pop any comments that you have in the chat window. You'll see those in the panel here in the GoToWebinar sidebar. I'll be keeping a look at those as we go all the way through today's conversation. Now, we've had some tech problems, which is why we're a minute late. Our guest today, his video isn't working, so I'll be the only one on video, but fortunately his audio is. And so I would like to welcome our guest for the conversation today. Our guest is Greg Woodall. Greg is Senior Director of Strategic Sourcing at CIBC. CIBC is a Canadian multinational banking and financial services corporation. So first and foremost, Greg, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Phil.
Now, there's a question that I ask really at all the different interviews and webinars and things like that to my guests to really just get a little bit of understanding about your context within procurement. And that question is, did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
I would say procurement found me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a long career within financial services and probably was at CIBC for 20 years, worked in different facets of the business. And as our company started looking at outsourcing opportunities, I was on the business side of a transaction. Mm-hmm. And found my interest at that point in the procurement function, and it grew from there.
And so today, I wonder if you could just share a little bit about what's included in your scope at CIBC.
So my scope of responsibilities is we're organized on a relationship basis. So I'm responsible in supporting all the procurement needs of our capital markets business, mm-hmm. our Canadian commercial banking business, our Canadian wealth management business, and our back office infrastructure group.
And so given kind of the focus, I imagine there's a lot of regulatory requirements and third-party risk management that kind of plays a large part of the role, as well as traditional procurement and sourcing responsibilities.
Correct. There's a number of complexities. We're a Canadian financial institution, so being that we're highly regulated domestically. But on top of that, when you look at our businesses like our capital markets business, it's a global business. So we need to comply with regulations in all of the jurisdictions mm-hmm. in which we do business, which includes Asia Pacific, the UK and EU, and the United States.
Yeah, that's I've had some similar experiences leading international procurement in financial services, and there's a lot of stakeholder management that's involved in that as well, isn't there? Because you're having to really fulfill the most stringent regulatory requirements, which don't necessarily exist in each one of the countries, which can bring a lot of perceived bureaucracy to the procurement process when it's actually needed.
I agree. There's probably two educations that are required, right? So one is with a supplier. So we may have an enterprise supplier who very much understands the regulatory environment in, say, the Canada and the US. Mm-hmm. And then we need to ask for additional things because we're operating in, say, Luxembourg, and they're not familiar with that regulatory environment. So there's an education of suppliers, and then the same can be true in our business groups. When you talk about the bureaucracy, they may be well aware of their regulatory environment, but if the item that we're sourcing is going to be used in all our business units, we have to introduce those other regulatory conditions. And sometimes the regulatory requirements conflict with each other.
Mm-hmm. in the conversation, I want to first of all just kind of talk about the transformation that you have embarked upon at CIBC within the procurement organization. I just wondered, so recently you've moved kind of the structure of the team, and I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you moved from and then how you're currently set up.
Yeah, so in terms of the way we were formally organized, it would have been what you would consider a traditional model where we were organized around categories. So the procurement group, we would have a travel and marketing team and a real estate team and so forth. So we were organized by category. While that was effective to a certain extent, at times we would get in conflict with our business because we didn't have a lens on what the business priority was. So we could be emphasizing something in the negotiation that wasn't of the paramount concern to the business. And because you're dealing, if you were dealing with real estate, you would be dealing with every business in the organization. You don't necessarily have the time to really understand what that business is trying to achieve. So we pivoted and we decided to be organized on a relationship basis. And the relationships break down into two components. One is we took an enterprise view of our relationship with our suppliers. So when you start dealing with some of the larger suppliers, they could be dealing with us in multiple categories. Because we deal with the supplier as a relationship, we take into consideration the full relationship with CIBC, and we can bring our full spend power and leverage to that relationship. With the business is we can understand what the business, better understand what the business achieve or wants to achieve and determine whether or not quality is the main focus of the business, speed, price, whatever it is that the business. And to the extent that we better understand the business, we'll understand the regulatory requirements and other constraints that they have. Since making this move, we had a secondary benefit that we didn't necessarily anticipate up front, and that is the benefit to our employees. So when we switched from category to relationship, our employees had greater variety of work. So you could take somebody that for years of all that they've ever got to do was, say, software licensing, and all of a sudden they're involved in the other categories. They found that as a benefit and a positive to their work day, and it really gave them new purpose.
How did stakeholders respond to that? So now they're having, I anticipate they've got stronger relationships with individuals. They have somebody they know who to go to, who kind of manages everything behind the scenes or, within the procurement organization to support them. But it's not necessarily that those are experts in the categories that they're buying, and they may previously have been connected with that person who has been buying, software licensing for a number of years.
And Phil, you're bang on. It's no longer the procurement organization is no longer faceless to them.
Yeah.
If they have one person to go to, if they run into a glitch, if something isn't working, they know who to call. And in today's world, we all know it in our working relationship with any company, it is very difficult to get to that one person that can advocate back into your organization. And you're correct. In procurement, we advocate on behalf of the business in a number of ways. One is throughout the procurement group, but we can also advocate for the business with other groups in the bank that are not necessarily organized on a relationship basis. So say the legal department or the info security team or our privacy office and so forth. So we simplify, or at least hide, some of the bureaucracy that has to be worked with to get a good deal done. We can front that in such a way that we keep it out of the business, and the business therefore can focus on what they should be focused on, and that is bringing new revenue into the bank.
It's interesting. One of the things you said that I think is really, really important is sometimes working with stakeholders. When you have people who know the business and they know, they have that kind of relational view, as opposed to something that's sometimes a bit more transactional when it's just sourcing project by sourcing project. They kind of know how to navigate the procurement processes without that being a hindrance to the business unit.
Correct.
And making sure that things are still done behind the scenes, but that it doesn't feel to the stakeholder that it's you're just kind of checking the boxes and going through a process. And the role therefore at procurement is a process role rather than a expertise, insight, intelligence role. And I think that as much as we can do to do that is a benefit in terms of the customer service that you're giving.
And you're right. So when you talk about at the start of this process, it wasn't necessarily that every business unit opened their arms and said, "Oh, come sit at my management table," right? That wasn't it. What happened is we knew as a group that we had to earn that, right? And you had to distinguish what we could bring to the table, and it had to be different, right? So we had to distinguish ourselves, and we had to have excellent delivery. Once you start earning that right to be at the table, then it just starts cascading. And our business at this point, most of my businesses, I am invited to be at the table when they do their annual strategic planning. I am invited to be at the table, and members of my team are asked to be at their table when they may be dealing with a service issue with the supplier, which isn't normally the procurement responsibility, but we can help in resolving issues before they become big problems, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an earned level. In doing all of this transition, we've actually increased our savings on our contracts when we were in the category specific. So our actual annual hard dollar savings that we contribute is probably doubled from what it was before we reorganized.
Interesting. So I want to come to strategic planning in a second, but I want to just focus on that a minute, because was there any trepidation in terms of the impact that this change may have on savings to start with? Because really, you kind of transition from this, we're focusing on the savings first, to we're focusing on the business first. And therefore,
so when you talk about it in the context of strategic planning, the way that we did it before was not strategic at all. And we found that we were in conflict with the business strategy. And if I were to say that, is we would review a category, we would identify a potential cost savings, and we would develop a plan, but it's independent on what the business is already engaged in and what they want to do and what they want to achieve. So we're competing for the same resources to drive change. Mm-hmm. And that causes a friction between us and the business because we weren't aligned on the strategic objective.
Yeah, and oftentimes then those procurement strategies are seen as being very procurement centric and siloed, and this is the procurement view of the world, rather than this is what the business needs to be successful, the individual stakeholders need to be successful.
Correct. So in building the relationship and being able to evidence that that we have an understanding of the business, and getting invited into the planning cycle and the strategic planning cycle of the business, we can then say, okay, this is what you're trying to achieve over the next few years. Here's what your current supplier profile looks like. Here's suppliers where you're indicating that you may want to stick with these suppliers for the next 7 years because you don't have funding to run a project. We're 2 years out. Maybe we go and talk to that supplier about getting a discount for an early renewal. But it's based on knowing that the business has no intention and won't have the resources to put it out to RFP on renewal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having those discussions and building it into their plan versus us having a plan, we're a support function, not a leading function.
So let's talk about that strategic planning process then, and kind of the data and the insights and the market intelligence that you're able to bring to help kind of drive the business in some of the decisions it makes, because ultimately that's where we can have the most impact as procurement, is when we're informing decisions at that level, as opposed to on a project by project basis. Of course, you can on a project by project basis, but the further upstream you can get, the more impact that we can have. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you have been able to access and use market intelligence and the data and insights that you have internally to now start informing some of those strategies, now that you have that seat when you're in that strategic planning process.
So Phil, that's a good point. There's a couple of factors involved in this. One is definitely being aware of how the bank plans is important, and being able to embed yourself into the planning process versus standing outside of it is important. So in CIBC, we have a strategic planning office. In the way that the bank has reorganized, procurement and the strategic planning office are now in the same group.
Yeah.
Because we can help each other. That strategic planning office goes through an annual cycle. Obviously, like any business, there is only so much funds available for initiatives in any given year, and there has to be a stratification. As you go through that planning cycle, within CIBC, the items are categorized into a couple of different things. One is keep the lights on initiatives, meaning these are things we have to do just to keep the bank running. Then there's the regulatory initiatives and understanding that they have to be done. And from a procurement standpoint, you need to understand the importance. When the importance is to meet a regulatory requirement, the dates and what needs to be done, they don't move. The regulators set the date. So we need to build the procurement plan that's going to hit that date. And then the third one is our growth strategies. So in Run the Bank, what we can do is we can say, we can look at what is being done in the Run the Bank and say, there's an opportunity, understanding what you're trying to do and what you're doing. There's an opportunity, because we know the service landscape, that there's an opportunity to maybe outsource a function that is currently run insourced, that is a cost driver for the bank. There's a number of areas in all businesses, but specifically in the bank, where the business area is challenged by how do you digitalize the business, right? Yeah. So understanding the business has this challenge with digitalization, is finding the right partner to help them on their digitalization journey is going to be important. There's across the globe right now, there's a whole transformation in what is called payments modernization, but It's how do you move from the typical payment by a credit card or a debit card or payment with cash to all the new different payment methods that are out there. That's transformative in the financial services industry, and it's you're talking about touching the main plumbing of the organization, and if you make a mistake and if you pick the wrong partner to help you, you would have serious customer service issues coming out of it. So being aware that here's the threats to the organization, here's the opportunities for the organization, and then us going out and surveying the landscape, the global landscape, to say, how is this being solved in other organizations? What are the partners that they're using? And being able to bring that to the table, and not ignoring the fact that our business people are very well aware of some of the best solutions out in the world, and taking that feedback from them and saying, you know what, we can add that in our research together, and we can find the right partners to bring in and assist the bank in what it's trying to achieve.
What do you find the most impactful pieces of market intelligence and research that you actually kind of bring to the conversation from a procurement perspective as you're having those conversations?
There's a couple of things. One of them is being able to understand what the supplier is trying to achieve. One of my favorite books is the Harvard book on getting to yes, and it's this the concept of the supplier's got to make money, the supplier's got to be successful, especially when you're buying services that we're going to utilize for multiple years, if not decades, right? You can't enter the relationship in such a way. So I do, and my team does a lot of work to understand what is important to the supplier, and seeing whether or not what we're doing and what's important to us can't be aligned. And not in all cases are you going to get alignment, but you can get alignment between the two organizations. So knowing where a supplier is investing their research and development dollars matters. If we know where our business unit is trying to get to, and we have a business partner that is investing money to go to the same place, that's the perfect solution. So you're not just buying today's solution, you're buying the future solution. So that investigation into the potential partners and truly understanding what drives their business and what they're doing and what their business challenges are at any given moment is very important, right? The last thing that a bank needs is to be in the situation of having a critical service with the supplier that is running into financial difficulty, has their own regulatory problems, is not focused on current delivery and not focused on the future.
As you're going through that supplier selection process, it sounds like collaboration is really important, and building win-win relationships with your suppliers is really important, as opposed to it being, the zero-sum game of who can squeeze the most out of the other party in the short term. So, as you're looking into the win-wins, what kind of information are you looking for when you specifically get into negotiations that kind of goes beyond kind of understanding what success looks like for both parties, but just to make sure that you're putting in place an agreement and a contract that protects you and ensures that you're still receiving value for money.
So we do the typical formal due diligence on our suppliers. So I'm not going to talk much about the fact that we pull recent litigation reports, and we look at the financial adequacy and so forth. I'll ignore that for a second. I think everybody does that. In addition to that, we look within our organization for individuals on our executive team that may have or have had a relationship with suppliers. So if I took our supplier landscape, we've got 5,000 suppliers, and that sounds like a lot of suppliers. Our top 125 suppliers are probably 85% of our spend, right? Mm-hmm. So in those top 125 suppliers, we have broken them out between myself and I have 3 peers, and we each have taken a percentage of those suppliers, and we maintain a good understanding of those suppliers and what they're doing at any given time. That includes things like I look at their press releases, I attend their investor calls, I look what their investors are asking of them. I review all the press release, so I join the newswire services to make sure that I'm getting any press releases, and so I become very well aware of my selection of suppliers. The second thing that we do is we understand who in the bank may have formerly worked with one of our suppliers, or have the supplier could also be a client of the bank. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about the suppliers that client of the bank, there's 2 things important about that. One is if we were communicating to the supplier a negative message saying that we're terminating a service, we would make sure that the relationship manager on the revenue side is aware of that. It doesn't necessarily change the decision, but it makes sure that we're acting with one voice. Again, being a bank, we do have access to a lot of other information because we have the capital markets group that does a lot of in-depth research on companies, and we benefit from that, and we can access that type of research that not necessarily every organization has.
Now, I would encourage anybody, if you have any questions for Greg, please feel free to pop them in either the chat box, or there is a question box as well. I have those open in front of me. And one of the questions I was going to ask, but it kind of ties into to a question we received, was how are you managing, or what are your performance objectives? The question was, when delivering cost savings, how do you report cost savings to C-suite? But I want to expand that a little bit to, kind of general procurement performance measures that you're reporting as a group.
So I'll start with the cost savings. Our cost savings are attributed to both the procurement group and the business itself. Mm-hmm. When I say the way we were organized before, if procurement had put a savings target in, the business didn't get credit for that savings, even though we're getting the savings in that business. So one of the big changes is we both get credit for the savings, and that gets us the business support to achieving that. In terms of that tracking, it's done at a very detailed level. So anytime that we're reporting on savings, the arbitration on whether or not it's a real hard savings is done by the finance group, and the finance group tracks it, not only when we execute the deal, but over the lifetime and the realization of that. So they do that, and for us, we have a target, and it's a multiple of the expense of our group. And today we return a significant multiple back in savings over what our budget is. And what that, just that measure itself, what that changed is we're no longer seen as a cost center. We actually are seen as a critical player in the profitability of the bank. If you look, today was our annual results were declared. And if you look at the press release, one of the items in our key measures as a bank is what's called operating leverage. And we have a 1.6% operating leverage to the positive. What that means is our revenue grew 10%, but our expense only grew 8.8%. We can draw a direct line between what procurement does to that 1.6%.
Right.
And we're recognized in the organization. We're an organization of 45,000 people. The procurement organization is 90 people. And we had a substantial contribution to that 1.6 and keeping the expense growth down. So there's that one. Then there's the need. So another measure of our success is are we doing what we need to do to make sure that the bank is resilient? So people expect and trust their financial institution is going to be there when they wake up in the morning, right? So it's important that we get to the point that you were making earlier with our suppliers. It's important that our suppliers truly understand, and the contractual language is clear enough to understand that in certain services, we cannot afford to have an outage. You know what it feels like if you go the Christmas season and you go to pay for something at a retailer and your debit card doesn't work. It would have a massive impact. So, and losing the trust of our clients is not something we can afford. So resiliency is a main focus, and the fact is if you look in the Canadian banking landscape, we've been in the situation where other banks have faced problems because their partner has failed, where we have not seen the same. So part of that is advocating for not consolidating everything with one supplier, having a failover supplier and so forth. So resiliency is a measure. Regulatory compliance is a measure. Turnaround time, it's a tough one, but it's definitely shortening the cycle time on our procurement process. We measure it. We're always looking on how can we improve it and how can we get things done quicker.
I'm just having a look at other questions just in the few minutes that we've got remaining. As you were kind of setting up the sourcing process, did you kind of build the access of supplier intelligence into the kind of the workflows that you have? So there's a certain point in the sourcing process where you know, okay, I got to go and make sure that I have X, Y, and Z in terms of market insights that I'm bringing into the process at this point and moment in time. Or is it a little bit less formal?
No, it's absolutely a critical component. So we have a couple of places where it's used, but definitely in the first step in our procurement process includes a heavy component of research.
Yeah.
So that's at the start. Now, at the start, it may be quite broad in terms of the type of research we're doing. As we narrow down the potential candidates that we're going to potentially do business with, then we will start doing more in-depth research, but more focused research on those firms and those solutions. So it builds through. And one of the things that's important is remembering, as you get further in the procurement process, remembering what those objectives and that research told you at the start and revalidating it in the future steps. As you get further along, you want to transition from research and actually move to execution. And you've got to be careful because you can get sidetracked. You could get into step 4 or 5 and somebody introduces a new piece of information, and it can cause you to get into churn and not be able to get your deal done in a reasonable time frame. So there is the need to realize that research and more information at a certain point is actually disruptive.
Now we have a question here which is more on your operating model, and the question is, who owns the contract review process? Is it legal or is it in procurement?
The contract is with procurement. Now, what I would say is we work in partnership with our legal group, and I'll put our deals in 3 levels. There are deals where a representative from legal needs to be involved. So our higher risk, higher dollar value deals, someone in legal will be assigned. Then we have a second group of a category of deals in which paralegals are used. The paralegal group is part of the procurement team. They're not part of legal. So legal has set a box in which the paralegal group can give the procurement person advice. And as long as it's within that box, we don't need to confirm with legal. And then there's the third bucket of deals where we have a deal template. We have a parameter that we can stay within, that as long as it's this type of deal, we're using our template and we stay within the parameters that we've been delegated an authority, we don't need legal or paralegal to be involved.
And I'm sure that accelerates the process then.
It does.
Deals not needing to go to legal.
Well, we actually diverted, I should have said there's a 4th category. We've diverted some of the activity direct to the business, and we keep procurement out altogether. So again, the business, in this case, the business and the supplier have to execute on our paper and nothing can change. If they execute on our paper and they use the template and they change nothing, the business does not necessarily need to engage procurement. An example of that would be, say you were booking a conference at a hotel.
Right. So I know we're coming to the end of the conversation. There's another interesting question around the operating model and the setup of your procurement team. So now you've moved from kind of that category focus to a business unit focus. do you have then a center of excellence that's behind the scenes, you know, made up of a variety of different people who are helping all those relationship managers that the relationship managers can tap into? Or does each one of those relationship managers have their own kind of smaller team behind them, maybe of sourcing managers or analysts or, you know, other kinds of role that keeps it quite siloed? This is the group that supports, you know, business A.
Very good question, because I should have mentioned it before. We debated which way was the better, and we definitely have a support group that's behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So in that support group, we have a team that does reporting and analysis for us, right? And these are data experts, they're research experts. So we have that team. We have a learning and development team that helps us with our just keeping our skills up, and that team maintains relationship. So we have subscriptions with various partners like yourselves, where we ensure that we're maximizing the benefit of having those partner relationships. So we have a team in the background that maintains that. We have a team that does all our administrative activity, and we have an RFP, RFS, RFI team that provides legs and arms to support when we're driving a competitive process. So yes, we do have these teams in the background that support all of us, right? All of the procurement individuals that are directly doing the sourcing activity.
Well, Greg, I know it's time to call the conversation to a close. So I apologize to anyone who asked questions. We've got a few questions in here that we didn't get the opportunity to ask, but I want to thank everybody for joining us and for sticking with us as we dealt with Greg's video. We got him on audio, so we still got all the really interesting answers to the questions that we had lined up. So thank you for joining us today. And Greg, thank you so much as well for sharing your journey at CIBC with
thanks
our audience
for
today.
Inviting me, Phil.
All right, well, thanks a lot, everybody, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and take care. Bye.